It's been 5 years since the last mainline Sonic game, being Sonic Forces back in 2017. Let's just say that that one was received somewhat poorly. The criticism was enough to make Sonic's team rethink their initial goal of one Sonic game a year. Going into the development of Sonic Frontiers, a more open-level design was inspired by the Zelda series, combat inspired by the Devil May Cry series, and an entirely different type of script being written by Ian Flynn, who is the main man responsible for the highest-selling video game comics of all time, starring the Blue Blur himself. This is the first ever truly open-world Sonic game. You could argue Adventure or 06, but Frontiers is entirely in a league of its own. There are two different types of levels. You have your cyber zones, where it's a typical 3D Sonic stage you have to S-rank. Then you have the massive islands you get to explore. One thing I love is how it's literally the exact same controls no matter if it's a zone or if you're just on the island. The moves are the exact same, except the zone sections do take away the combat for obvious reasons, as it would slow you down. Starting off with the zones, the small zones based off Sonic's memory were probably like my second favorite part of the game. Right off the bat, S-ranking was a lot easier than I'd like for it to be. Sometimes I'd poke around catching red rings, and I'd still have like 10 seconds to spare. But the level design is so fun. One thing that Sonic Forces was missing was multiple paths, which Frontiers brings back, especially if it was one of the harder levels. Level 1-2 is definitely the big one that a lot of people struggled with, including myself. But the feeling of finally getting that beautiful S-rank, it's pumping the adrenaline in. Now, one thing to consider is that these levels do not need to be done to complete the game. So if you're actually just into the open world combat, you only have to do that. The keys that you earn from the levels, you can also earn from around the hub world. You can finish the game without having done every single level. But Frontiers benefits from this a little bit more by how it lets you pick and choose what type of gameplay you prefer. Onto the open zones. These were the things I was the most nervous about, but I can happily say it was done mostly well. But there are just a few little nitpicks. Aside from being able to fight and combo enemies and mini bosses in so many different ways, the open world itself is incredibly fun to explore. All of the different platforming sections, and there are hundreds. Once you access the whole map, you'll see all the island's separate little collectibles, and every single one of them is a mini little Sonic level, 2D or 3D. Granted, they're like maybe 15 seconds to like a minute at most, but they're fun little spurts of fun. The bosses in the game are so badass! Supersonic has always been reserved as a potential not guaranteed tool to use at the end of the game. Whether there's a true ending by collecting the Chaos Emeralds and bonus levels, or sometimes being a story element, regardless, it has always been something just for the final boss. But this game's blessing you with 4 end of act Supersonic boss fights. These fights are the shit. As soon as the metal starts and you're zipping around, a lot of the combat actually reminded me of like Dragon Ball Z Kakarot. It's not taken exactly from that, but in terms of the flying combat and how he combos. Now, one thing to keep in mind, you need to play this game in hard mode. That is what I started the game out at, and from what I've heard, easy mode is an absolute cakewalk for these guys. But I guarantee you, on hard mode, you cannot just mash the button. It actually took me several different times to learn exactly what I was doing, because it doesn't hold your hand either. It gives you some tips when you die, so all the combos that you've learned on your way to this boss come in handy. Stepping back a second, going to the mid-bosses, the Guardians, if you will. These were also super cool. Not every single one of them was all that great.
This is a joke, right? This is a joke. Because, you know, we know.
But a majority of them were super cool. Just the feeling of suddenly jumping into what would normally be an end of level boss, which again, a lot of those are completely optional. 100% of the mini bosses you do not have to do. It'll play a little 2-second transition, but you can just run off in the opposite direction. If you are a bitch! It's just really fun figuring out exactly how to beat every single one of these. A lot of these come down to specific timing, different types of gameplay. Whether you have to go on like little grind rails and collect these little bubbles, or get the life sucked out of you while you chase this little bugger around the map. Or sometimes they'll just fling you into the air and you have to dive back down to the ground. Or just simply sumo wrestling. Very nice callback to Amy's final boss in Adventure 1. Let's go! I think the worst part about Sonic Forces was, for me, the writing. It came out like someone who didn't understand the source material and was handed a typewriter and had to turn it in a week. But finally, this is one of the best Sonic stories to ever come out in a game. I've been keeping up with the IDW Sonic comics, and Ian Flint is an absolute madman when it comes to these references. Not to mention the story building, the character development. Also, the voice direction was really different. It's less Saturday morning cartoon and more like, I don't know, passionate, I guess. Of course, Roger Craig Smith just sounds like Mirage now, but that's fine with me. It's just a noticeable thing. I don't want to spoil much of the story, but the story really picks up at the end of every single Titan fight, as you sort of get a glimpse into the background of the Coco and the entire ancient civilization that you're learning about. Not to mention, the best part about this story is how much it affects the lore in general, including not just reveals about characters we did not know were officially part of the lore until now, but the actual origin of the Chaos Emeralds. I know it's so specific, but I'm so into this kind of stuff. Learning about these small details and the cliffhanger at the end, the writing, just everything. The final boss speech is so good. As for the music, this is officially the longest Sonic soundtrack in history, which is quite the feat, and it is an easy vinyl purchase. I've already mentioned the badass Supersonic themes, but I haven't even gotten started on the Zen Big the Cat sections, the super chill Starfall Island themes, how the music picks up and drops down depending on exactly what you're doing. A mid-boss starts up and it quickly transitions into this epic electric beat. The point is, everything matches the atmosphere and is done so in a way that it intensifies every single perfect moment. As for 100%ing the game, I absolutely did it. Kind of. Did I get every single trophy for the game? Absolutely. Did I do everything you possibly feasibly could in the game? No. Like I mentioned before, there are hundreds of these little mini Sonic sections where you just get collectibles. But after collecting enough of them to get all the little mini side stories, there's not really a purpose to get any more of those, aside from just clearing out the map. So I only got the amount that were needed to do it. Other than that, completed the game. And doing it the way that I did is absolutely worth doing. My OCD's bugging me, but I gotta leave it be. But I'd say completing the game definitely adds about 10 hours or so to your playthrough. So hey, it's the best way to get your money's worth. The only thing I was kind of half and half with in terms of story was, as you go through the game, you have these little side stories, which is what you collect the little collectibles for each individual trapped character. Tails side stories, loved them. Wholesome, super interesting, funny. Knuckles side stories, loved half of them. My boy Knuckles is tossing hands with a kindergartner. But Amy's story, I don't know, maybe I'm just not into the character as much. But God, some of her side story stuff was, I was tempted to hit skip. I didn't. I only have 2 complaints when it comes to the gameplay. The first one is a very small pet peeve. You ever have it when you're mastering a game? You're going through the entire experience. Then that final boss just hits you with the bop, different gameplay, let's go. I know there's only a few games where it's done this, but without spoiling it, the final boss fight, yes, it does have a Supersonic section, but the section right after that, okay, I'm just gonna say, it's Galaga. You've already built the perfect boss gameplay. Why are we doing an arcade shooter? I mean, it wasn't a bad section. It was difficult and I liked it. God, I had to retry it like friggin' 11 times. But that's the thing, you do the entire game in one play style, then it hits you with a completely different one by the end of it. I mean, you have like 2 puzzles beforehand that have the same gameplay, but that's not nearly enough for me to really get into it. And the other minor issue is more of a quality of life thing. It comes down to the skill tree. The skill tree is not necessary at all. Now, here's the thing. I think what they should have done, so you have all these little collectibles that upgrade your ring count, speed, defense, attack power. That should have just been in the skill tree. Like, if they had taken the collectibles and made it to where, I don't know, maybe you can go to Tails' workshop and get some cool outfits to try out. Meanwhile, all of these different upgrades are a part of the skill tree, I feel like that would have felt better to upgrade. And it would have felt more like I was personalizing my own little Sonic. But instead, it's just very straightforward. By around the middle of the second world, I was 100%ing it as I went. So I just got all of this stuff right away. So aside from the 4 main upgrades, I didn't really feel like I was progressing too much in my skill set after that point. The only types of issues I had with the zones, now this is a half and half one, is the shortness of the levels. Granted, with something like 1-2 or some of the 5th world levels, those levels being short, and some of them do go long, by the way. There were some that were like 4 or 5 minutes. But the nice thing about the short levels is that as you repeat them, I played this on the Series X, and every time I hit restart, it is snappy. It goes right back to where I was. So with how short the levels are, if I'm trying to master it, being able to restart a level on a dime, and it not being that long overall, makes mastering the levels that much easier. I just hope for future titles, they maybe make these either 1, harder to S rank, or 2, just longer in general. Issues in the open zone gameplay, I have 2 separate issues. 1 was only in World 1 and 2, and 1 was only in 3. The issue I had in 3 and sometimes in the other worlds is that sometimes the terrain itself can be a little unpredictable. Like for example, World 3 is a very crowded area because you have the big volcano in the middle of it. So what would happen several times in a playthrough is I would be zipping along my way, all of a sudden I bump into a spring I didn't know was there, next thing you know I'm vaulted into a mini platforming section I didn't try to do. And the issues I have in Worlds 1 and 2 is really just the pop-in, but past 1 and 2, it's really not that noticeable. Yes, it is there every now and then, but playing this on my Series X, it was barely noticeable. Literally the only thing I don't like about the bosses is that you can't replay them. Like, my boy, when I got the homies coming over, I'm trying to show them this awesome boss fight. Let me do it. So the final question, is Sonic Frontiers worth the price? Absolutely. There are games that do open world much better than Sonic Frontiers, but it's going to be damn hard finding one that's more fun than this. I can't remember the last time I found it hard to get out of my chair and go to bed because I couldn't take myself off of the game. I always found myself wanting to explore the next area or do the next little mini section. It has its flaws, but they pale in comparison to the incredible music, fantastic character development, and badass combat. This game literally made me feel like I was 6 years old playing Sonic Adventure for the first time again. It has taken the Sonic franchise in a wonderful direction for the future, and I cannot wait for the next game. Sonic Frontiers was an absolute surprise and gets an incredible 5 out of 5. It is absolutely worth the price, and since it's the holiday season, you gotta grab them Black Friday deals. Let's go! Thank you guys so much for watching. If you got to the end of this video, make sure to subscribe for the next epic review. What did you think of the game? Tell me down below. Grant Guy out. Peace.